Hey everybody, it's Joe. Happy Friday morning to you. I have an interesting day today. I'm gonna become an extra on a TV show. It's a thing to do. I'm not gonna make a career of it. Don't worry. I know I've been in the background my entire life, but I'm not going to. It's just a thing to do. I got some time on my hands, so I thought, why not? It's a few bucks. It's something to do. You might meet somebody, and as part of the testing for the production these days, they test everybody for COVID. And not only that, they pay you to take a COVID test. Isn't that wild? They pay you to take a test. When I was a kid, there were always special episodes of sitcoms about somebody getting paid to take a test, and now it's normal. So today I'm going to drive to Culver City and take a COVID test, and they're going to pay me for it. And then I got to do it again Monday, and then I got to get fitted to be an extra, and then I got to go take two more COVID tests, and then we shoot. Isn't that wild? That's what I'm doing these days. I'm getting paid to take a COVID test and then paid to stand still. America, something else, right? My guest this week, this is an amazing guy. His name's Ken Kraft. He is the CEO of Hope of the Valley. It's a nonprofit that is, its mission is to end homelessness in Los Angeles. You talk about, you think your goals are big? Look what this guy's trying to do. And he's succeeding. He's got this, he's got that. He keeps expanding. They have more and more shelters open. They have things for kids who've aged out of foster care. They have things for homeless addicts. They have things for homeless people with mental illness, and on and on and on. They've got all these different projects going on. And not only that, his journey to get there is really something, because he had a tragic fall from grace, which he is quite candid about, which I really appreciate him talking. He opens up about it and he says it's what made him, and it led to the journey that he's on. And he's really a great guy. He didn't even know me. I said, "Hey, would you like to be on my talk show?" And he's all about it. He's like, "Yeah, sure, love to." So we had a nice chat, and it's not that funny. It's very eye opening. It's very revealing, and frankly, I think this is one of the best interviews I've done. So I hope you enjoy it. Oh, and I forgot to put it on gallery view. It's on speaker view, which is fine. He does most of the talking anyway. You've heard enough from me. Ken Kraft, thank you so much for your time. How are you doing this morning?
I am doing good. Good to be with you.
Good, thank you. No, thank you for your time. I really want to get into this. And ever since I saw the story about tiny homes, which seems like a great, great way to get homeless people to transition to out of homelessness. But we will get to that in a moment. First, a little about your background. You are from Southern California, is that correct?
Yes, born and raised in Ventura.
Ventura, and you lived your entire life in Southern California. When did you enter decide you wanted to become a pastor?
Well, I grew up in Ventura. I grew up in a very religious home. Went to church all the time. And when I was probably about 17, I thought, you know what? I think that's something I would like to do. I'd become very close with the pastor of the church I went to, and through fellowship with Christian athletes. I just really liked that. And so I ended up going that direction. I ended up going to Life Pacific and got my bachelor's degree in theology. And from there, I was a youth pastor for 7 years. And then I started a church that ended up growing to about 2,300 in weekend attendance. So it really took off.
That's wow, that is huge, because I've known pastors who they don't have that kind of attendance. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah,
That's
it
enormous.
was
Now,
like
where was this church?
a Simi Valley.
Okay, and you were there, you said, for 7 years.
Yeah, about 8 years by the time
Okay,
I finally stepped down.
and then you had to leave because this is a very unfortunate chapter in your life, but it defines you. So and you said you were willing to talk about it. So you had to leave the church.
Yeah, it was, I had the joy of building the church and building relationships. But unfortunately, I made a bad decision. I ended up having an affair, and the affair cost me everything. Unfortunately, I had to stand in front of the whole congregation. I had to acknowledge my sin, my indiscretion, my failure, and I was ushered out the back door of the church. And all of a sudden, that's all I had ever known. I mean, I was a teenager, I had trained to be a pastor, and now all of a sudden I'm disqualified, and I now find myself just floundering and kind of wandering. And some guy said, "Hey, I'll give you a job as an insurance salesman." And so, I mean, I would go around every day and just face rejection 20, 30 times a
Oh,
day. And I was already going through my own personal
yeah.
That's not what you need after what you just went through. I think I'll take on a job where I get rejected all day. Yeah.
Exactly. It was
How old were you at the time?
at that time I was probably about 30, 32.
And so I mean, every day, what are you thinking? You're like, what the hell am I supposed to do at this point?
Yeah, it got pretty dark. I got to a place where I really contemplated taking my life. It was just such a dark place because I couldn't see a pathway out, and I was just overwhelmed with my sense of failure. And when you're pastoring a church that large and you're still in the community, people recognize you, and you feel horrible. And I was trying to salvage the marriage, and that didn't make it. So other than my kids, I mean, I wanted to run to the East Coast to somewhere away from here. But on the other hand, I thought, you know what? If I do need to contend for redemption at the point of infraction. And first and foremost, I was a dad. And so I was committed to, I lost every other title. Okay. The only title I had left was I'm a dad. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to be the best dad I can possibly be.
See, well, now that speaks to two things. Number one, you made a conscious choice. You said, look, I could run, but I gotta face the music here. But the thing that strikes me, if we can stay on this for a moment, is people lean on their pastor when they need moral guidance. But where does the guy who gives moral guidance go when he needs moral guidance? Because you're sitting here obsessed with your failures, you're thinking about taking your own life. What did you do for a support system at that point?
Yeah, it was difficult because the support system that I thought I had, um, most of those folks didn't want to have anything to do with me, and so I felt like I was radioactive. And yet, but there was one or two people that actually came and stood by my side and said, "Listen, you know what? We're here for you." And so those really became the people that I was able to lean on, and then through that, I had a friend who said to me, "Hey, you seem to be kind of floundering in this insurance thing." I said, "It's horrible." I said, "It's nothing but rejection." And he said, "Well, would you consider? I'm a high level director for Equifax." And he says, "I can teach you. It's new. It's real time authentication technology. You'd be selling this to very large corporations." He goes, "I know you can speak and you can communicate. I actually think you'd do good." And so I said, yes, I took that job. And one of the nice things about that is it took me out of the area in the sense that I would travel a lot. So I'd be flying to Philadelphia, I'd be flying to Miami, flying to DC, Seattle. And so it kind of got me out and people that knew nothing about me, about my past. And so I started to feel like, okay, I'm going to be okay. There's a future in front of me.
Yeah, yeah, and I would think, in the back of your mind, you must be thinking, well, here I studied theology, and now here I am engaged in real-time technology, such and such. In the back of your mind, I'm guessing, as the 6 or 8 years went on when you were doing this, you must have thought, okay, this is a load off, but this isn't me. Was that voice getting louder as the years went on?
Yeah, I felt like I was a fish out of water. I mean, I was doing it and I was doing pretty successfully, but I didn't feel that that's what I was called to. I didn't feel that that's what my purpose in life was. And so as I was doing this and just getting a little bit frustrated, but thankful for the paycheck, and the ability to travel and to still be a dad, that's when I got a phone call from a gentleman that I knew from the church, but he also ran the Ventura County Rescue Mission. And he called me up one day and said, "Hey, Ken," he goes, "Have you ever considered working with the poor and the homeless?" And in all sincerity, I said, "No." I mean, it had never crossed my mind, not once. And he says, and he goes, "Would you be willing to come have lunch with me?" And I said, "Of course, I'd love to have lunch with you." Not thinking anything about, a career path.
Set up, suckered, reeled in. Yep.
And so he called me. So I went and I drove to his office, and instead of taking me to a restaurant, he took me to the mission cafeteria. And there must have been, 80 to 100 guys that were all part of the mission. And I got to tell you, it was really one of those defining moments in my life when I look backwards, because when I sat in there, even though I was having conversation with the executive director, I kept looking around and I saw me. And I thought, man, that could have been me. That should have been me. but for the grace of God, that was me. And so I left that day, and just as one of those internal moments where, see, I'd already kind of disqualified myself from ever really being used in a meaningful way again. And I thought, the best I can do is just put in my time, work, and try to be a dad. But I left there, and I just thought, because he asked me, he goes, would you ever consider, doing this kind of work? And I really don't think so. But when I left that day, I drove home, and I just prayed a little prayer in my heart. I just said, God, if you see fit to use me to give people another chance like you've given me, then I'm open. I'm open. It was just one of those quiet little prayers. And from there, 2 days later, he called me up and said, "Hey, Ken, I want you to really think about this. We're starting something new. Would you be willing to lead it in the San Fernando Valley?" And I said, "Look, I don't know the first thing about homelessness." And he said, "It's okay." He goes, "You're a leader." He goes, "You can learn the skills." He goes, "But we need a leader." And that was with the San Fernando Valley Rescue Mission. And so I had the privilege of starting that organization and ran that for 8 years before I started Hope of the Valley Rescue Mission.
Wow. And it's funny. I mean, there's so many thoughts going through my head now. That old adage that, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear, that sort of thing. And then not ignoring that little voice and your intuition telling you this Equifax stuff isn't right. So talk for a moment about how exactly did you leave Equifax? Did you just say, "Yeah, I'm done, here's my 2 weeks notice," or did you just call, "I'm not going to Philadelphia next week"? How did that happen?
Yeah, I always want to finish well. Because unfortunately I didn't finish well one time, and so I know how bad that is. So I wanted to finish well, and so I just had that conversation, with my superior, and said, "Look, I can't thank you enough. You have been so good to me and so generous and gracious in providing me this job. But my past, and I really I'm much more of a people person, and I want to get involved in the community and society and social work and those kinds of things." And I said, "I just think it's time for a transition." And he already knew. He goes, "I know wasn't long term for you. This was a transitional." And so I took a 50% cut in pay to start working at a rescue mission. But it was one of those things that I knew it was the right thing for me. And I had, kind of the spiritual underpinnings. I had the leadership development. And this was just a new opportunity to do something kind of in a way that I was wired in terms of relationships.
Now, what was that transition like when you first started at the San Fernando Valley Mission? Was it a total culture shock, or did you say, "Okay, I know how to reach these people. I've worked in the business world. I know how to navigate through bureaucracy and stuff like that"? How much of a learning curve was there at first?
Well, and part of my reason for taking the job is because it was just getting launched. And I told them, and I realized, how bad can I mess this up? There's nothing here. And so if you're willing to take a risk on me to start this, then I'll do it. And I didn't know much. I didn't. So I just started reading everything I could on homelessness in Los Angeles, trying to understand this continuum of care. What does it look like from outreach and engagement to essential services, to shelter, to permanent housing, to mental health services, substance abuse? I mean, this whole new world. But I'm like, you know what? I really feel that this is what I'm called to do. And so I embrace it wholeheartedly.
And then at what point did you say to yourself, "I'm going to leave the San Fernando Valley Mission and start Hope of the Valley"?
I was working, the gentleman that brought me on, he had since retired years ago, before, and there was a new executive director. And I really did my best to work with this new executive director. But it was rough. He was an engineer. That was his background. And as an engineer, I mean, controlled everything. I tend to be much more of an entrepreneur. I tend to be more of a visionary. And so I tried, but we were like oil and water. And then finally, one day I just said, we both sat down and we both agreed, this isn't working. This just isn't working. And so it was from that then that I I gave my resignation. And then I thought, you know what, I really feel that I'm supposed to be here in the Valley, and I'm supposed to be doing something to really address this homeless crisis. And then it was out of that I started Hope of the Valley. That'll be 12 years ago this August.
And you've now it's expanded to over a dozen offices and what, over 200 employees, something like that?
Yeah, I mean, Hope of the Valley in the last 12 years has grown into a leading provider of housing and homeless services. We have, by the end of this year, we'll have close to 300 employees. At the end of this year, we'll have 15 shelters. We'll have over 1,300 beds in the San Fernando Valley, which is really unthinkable. It's never ever been like that. When I first started, there was virtually no beds. And so we're at a critical moment right now in the life of the city as it deals with this humanitarian crisis. For anyone that either lives in LA or has visited LA, you cannot drive the freeway systems and the streets without seeing this mass increase of homelessness. And so I really believe I would have never known when I started Hope of the Valley 12 years ago that we would be in a critical position right now to be one of the go-to agencies to help address this crisis.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about a guy who's found his purpose. You're truly the guy, the old saying, if you want a tree, the best way to get a tree is to plant one 15 years ago. The
Right,
second best way is to start now. Well, good thing you started so many years ago.
right.
When you first started this, you had experience at San Fernando Valley Mission, so you're starting your own. So you obviously know some of the nuts and bolts about how to get this going. But at the same time, you were starting pretty much from scratch. Was it just a matter of if I put it out there, the angels will start appearing, and you start getting a few donations, and you start to get some volunteers? How did the early days of this manifest?
Yeah, well, anytime you're starting something new, and by the way, we started in 2009. That was the recession, and not the best time to start a nonprofit. Okay.
Some people just like challenges, Ken.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the things I realized that to operate and run a good nonprofit, it's like a three-legged stool, and all three of those legs need to be attached and strong. The first leg has to do with your programs. The second leg is your administration functions. And the third leg is your finances and fundraising and development. And so I wanted to make sure that if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. And we're going to be a healthy organization. We're going to be sustainable, and we want to be able to grow. And so, we started, very humbly. There was a church that let us use their facility at no charge. And so we started serving. I remember we served our very first meal on a Wednesday night in the month of August 2009, and 23 people showed up. Now, by the end of this year, we're on target. We will be doing over 1 million meals cooked a year and
Wow.
served at our various shelters. So we've had that expansion. But so we started there in Sun Valley, and then from there we opened up our men's drug and alcohol recovery program. We opened up the first of our 3 family shelters. Since then, we've opened up a youth shelter for those who've timed out of foster care. We have many different adult shelters, year-round emergency shelters, safe parking, access center, navigation center, job center, and it's really become a very robust, healthy, engaged, dynamic organization. And sometimes, honestly, I look around and think, I don't think I'm the right guy to lead this, because, there's just, by the time you throw in that many employees and that much risk that's involved, and the complexity of the various programs that we operate with some of the rapid rehousing programs. But I live one day at a time, and I want to be a lifelong learner. And somebody once said, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And so we've built an amazing team of great leaders, and then also a great board of directors. And so I feel like, one of our mottos, not original, but, dream the dream and build the team. And that's what we've done. We've dreamed what is possible, and we've built the team. And then this year alone, we opened up the very first tiny home community in the city of Los Angeles. And just a week and a half ago, we opened the largest tiny home community in the state of California. And then in 2 weeks, we're opening up another one in Reseda. Then 2 weeks after that, another one in Tarzana, and then another one at the Arroyo Seco. And so I feel like we have to respond to this crisis.
Now, I mean, there's a lot there also to unpack. Number one, as far as you being a leader, I'm in show business. Let me tell you something. All you got to do is pretend to be a leader, and everyone else will follow. So you can walk the walk too. You're not pretending to be, you're doing the work. So just keep smiling, chest up. Hi, how you doing? Thank you. Glad to see you. Thank you all for all your work. And they'll keep following you. Trust me. Number two, as far as the tiny homes, this speaks to a bigger issue because you were talking about all the specific things, kids who timed out of foster care and people who need mental health and people who need drug rehabilitation and so forth. This tells me that you've really got your finger on the pulse of exactly how to help certain people in certain ways and at certain strata. So for example, I'm guessing the people who are in tiny homes, this is their transition before they get their apartment. How long were you waiting for this tiny home issue? Uh, you forget words after a certain age. How long were you waiting for tiny homes to become viable?
I was working with the University of Southern California with their architectural and engineering division. And we were coming up with a prototype. We actually built the prototype and we had it at one of our places in Van Nuys of a tiny home. And then we had it almost finished with the engineering side of how they were going to be linked together, stacked. And I was like very excited about that. And then all of a sudden, this company out of Seattle called Pallet Shelter came out with their model. And it was a much better model. Lightweight, it could be assembled in 90 minutes, didn't require fire sprinklers. It just looked good. And so I was talking to folks at USC and we just said, you know what, there's times where you just have to admit someone's got a better mousetrap. And instead of trying to, keep beating your head against this one program, follow what's working. And so this new technology, this new innovation, utilizing in the materials so they could go up rapidly. Then at that point, Councilman Paul Krikorian had we were talking and he said, what do you think about these? And I said, I think they're brilliant. And he says, okay, because I'm going to getting ready to start moving forward with these. And is this, would you guys be willing to be the provider if I can get these built? And I said, absolutely. Now, there are some people that would say, well, we shouldn't waste our money on interim housing or bridge housing, transitional housing, because what people need is a home. They need permanent housing. And I'm not going to disagree with that, right? People need a permanent home. But in Los Angeles, the average price of a one-bedroom apartment is $2,100. And what happened back in 2017, if you recall, there was a bond measure, Triple H bond measure, $1.2 billion to create 10,000 units of affordable housing. And everyone thought, this is the answer. We're going to solve homelessness. Well, 1 year went by, 2 years went by. It wasn't until the third year that the first affordable housing units, came online, and the LA Times got a hold of it, and the cost was close to $600,000 per unit. And people were saying, how in the world is this going to work? It takes that long to build it, and at that price, okay, and homelessness continues to increase double digits every year. So it didn't take a mathematician to realize this plan's not going to work. So the mayor did something very critical, and I commend him for it. He declared a shelter emergency. And by declaring a shelter emergency, a few things happened. One, organizations like Hope of the Valley, we now can open up shelters, not just in commercial zones, but also in manufacturing zones. Okay, so the Trebek Center, in honor of Alex Trebek, which we bought the roller rink in Skateland in Northridge, that's a manufacturing building, which we're converting into a 107-bed shelter. The other thing is, before the shelter emergency, we could only have 30 beds or less, unless you had a conditional use permit. But to get a conditional use permit, you had to have public hearings. And everybody would come out and say, not in my backyard, and it was virtually impossible. That all changed. Now there's no limit. You can have 100, you could have 200 people in a shelter, all under this shelter emergency. And the final thing that took place with the shelter emergency is that the city of Los Angeles could build shelters in any zoning if they own the land. And so the way we've been able to move so quickly and rapidly in deploying these tiny homes is it's built on city land. It's built on rec and park land. And like the site, the Alexandria site, Alexandria Park in North Hollywood, it's 103 units, 200 beds. It went up in 90 days. 90 days and it was up. So that's kind of the backstory of really a public-private partnership And I find myself in a position to be able to say, yes, we're in, let's do it. Let's make it happen.
Fantastic, especially when you compare it to the HHH bill where it's 600,000 per unit. And how much is it per unit for the tiny homes?
8,500.
Okay.
8,500 to purchase the actual unit. Now there's infrastructure costs.
Right. There's like shared bathrooms and things like that.
Yeah. So the infrastructure cost, it works out to about maybe $35,000 per unit versus the 600,000.
Now, to a NIMBY who says, why are we spending $35,000 per unit on this? How do you make the larger argument? And I'm sure there is one about, look, here's how it's going to help society. We're spending $35,000 a unit now, but without it, we're going to spend so and so on this. It's going to cost us this. It's going to cost us that, and so on. What are the number arguments on that?
Yeah. Well, the longer somebody stays on the streets, the worse they get. I mean, I could tell you story after story of just tragic, heartbreaking stories of maybe, let's just take a woman who she's evicted from her apartment. Imagine you're a woman, and if you have a vehicle, you're living in your vehicle. If you don't have a vehicle, all of a sudden you're on the streets. You have no protection. You have nothing to surround yourself with. And then that's what set the onset of even mental illness because of this paranoia, this high level of anxiety and stress, and you're hearing things. Okay, and then people start trying to numb that pain because they can't live with that. So then, there's substance abuse, and there's so much violence and stealing and theft that goes on at night. People turn to methamphetamines to stay awake at night. And so it's ugly. And the longer we leave people on the streets, the worse it gets. What we have to do is get people off the streets. Now, let me go on record and say, I am 100% in favor of a housing first model, permanent housing, when it's available. But in my mind, it is cruel and inhumane to have the streets become the waiting room for permanent housing. It's not okay. And it's not fair. It's not the way we should be treating people. So we need to at least get them inside, stabilize them, make sure people have the basic needs: food, shelter, clothing, and then we can provide the extra services of the mental health, job training, substance abuse. So when the permanent housing is available, we can easily migrate someone to the permanent housing. So to me, it's not either or, it's yes and. We need both.
And what kind of costs are there, like, to the police, who probably have to do a lot of things that they ordinarily wouldn't do? How stressed are the social services? Because you're talking about this example of a woman who has to start taking drugs just because she's, trying to cope with the stress and PTSD of her situation. How much do those costs add up over time?
Yeah, and that's a huge savings, for taxpayers, for society in general, because the police department, I mean, have you been reading the papers? They're talking about how many, I forget the increase in the numbers of fires that are being set by people that are homeless. And so now you have the fire department that's having to constantly go out and pulling them away from other things. And then you have, I talk to the hospitals all the time, and the numbers of people that are using the emergency rooms, as a shelter when they don't know anywhere to go, and they're staying there. And so it's driving up health costs. But when they come in and when they come into the tiny homes, they love it. I've interviewed a lot of the folks that are staying in the tiny homes, because I've had people say, oh, it's inhumane to have somebody have to live in a 64 square foot, they could say a shed. It's not a shed. It has 2 beds, it has air conditioning, heating, 4 windows, smoke detector, 2 electrical outlets on both sides. And most importantly, it has a front door that locks. And especially for women who have been traumatized and who've been abused on the streets, the ability to come inside, to lock a door. We have one woman that just breaks my heart. She was living in the North Hollywood Park, and she was kicked out of North Hollywood Park. She's in her late 30s, and she has some mild, mental disabilities. A very attractive woman. So she ended up moving into the wash nearby, and someone came at night, just cut with a knife and cut her tent and raped her. And she didn't know what to do. And so she went and got jeans that were 2 sizes too small and put them on every night in case somebody came again, to somehow slow down the perpetrator. And so it's easy for us that are housed to say, that that's not good enough. Well, let's ask them. And so I did that. So when we opened up the second tiny home, and the mayor was there and the councilman was there, I said, let me tell you some direct quotes from those that are living in these. One gentleman said, he feels like he lives in his own private gated community. Another person says he feels like he lives in the Taj Mahal. Another gal said, I actually have hope now that I'm going to be okay. And so to me, it's a powerful thing to get people off the streets, to give them hope, a new beginning, and the resources. We've already had people starting to transition into permanent housing out of these tiny
That
homes.
was my next question. About how long would a person stay in a tiny home? Is there an average, or is it vary from person to
Yes.
person?
The average is 4 to 6 months. Okay. Sometimes it's quicker. Sometimes when somebody comes in, the first thing we do when they come in, they meet with one of our case managers, and our case manager will say, okay, do you have your state ID? Do you have your birth certificate? Do you have your social security card? And usually the answer is no, because it gets stolen. So we help them get online. We order that because they're never going to get a job. They're never going to get a place to live without their documentation. So that's the first thing that we do. And then we link them up with one of our housing navigators. And the housing navigator immediately starts to see what kind of income do they have? What kind of income can they have? Can they work? Let's try to get them a job. If they can't work, let's link them to public benefit. And then how much will that be? Is there some kind of rapid rehousing program that we can link them to? But on average, it's 4 to 6 months. But I was saying sometimes it's quicker because when someone comes in, we'll ask them, do you have any extended family? And they might say, yeah, I have family in Phoenix. We'll call the family. And oftentimes it'll be like, oh my gosh, we thought he was dead. We didn't know. We haven't heard. And we'll link them together. And we have a foundation that will actually pay to transport people back to their family if they want them to come home. And so that's a beautiful thing as well. So sometimes it ends, we can end homelessness quicker. Other times, especially when there's severe mental illness or physical disabilities, it does take a little bit longer for us to find them adequate permanent housing.
Now these are great examples of wins, obviously, and it's from the sounds of things, it sounds like you're just moving forward all the time. However, is there a side of you that looks at the homeless crisis and think to yourself, how on earth am I going to stop this? I mean, yes, I'm helping this person, I'm helping a few dozen here, and these people are getting more funds and more angels are showing up with donations and volunteers, but there's still so many of them. How do you get up? Do you have these days where you say to yourself, what am I going to do today?
It can be daunting. I feel like whether we are or not, I feel like we are at the epicenter of homelessness in the United States. And I feel like all eyes are on us. Okay, is LA going to figure this thing out? And if we can figure it out, I think we can really become a model for the rest of the nation. And so because I see the fruit, I have to focus on how far we've come, not how far we have to go. Okay. And so when I look at how far we have to go, it can be overwhelming and daunting. When I look at the successes, I'm encouraged. Last month alone, we moved 24 people from interim housing into their own permanent housing. And so those for us, that's closing the deal. That's the touchdown. That's the home run. Those are celebrations. And so for me, we can't change the world, but we can change the world for that one person. And so that's what we focus on is how many people, and I'm an eternal optimist. Okay. I really believe we're on the right path, that if we can do this and not give up, and continue to build the interim housing. I know there's 42 projects right now for permanent housing throughout Los Angeles. Okay. It's going to help. And then we've got all these other interim housing projects. And I just believe that if we can continue to stay focused, and part of what's helped with this is there's a lawsuit right now in the city of Los Angeles. An organization called the Alliance for Human Rights filed a lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles a couple of years ago. And they said, Los Angeles, you know what, you keep doing these sweeps and wiping out all these encampments, but you don't have anywhere for people to go. And so you keep traumatizing people over and over and over again. And so a judge, his name is David Carter, he also addressed homelessness in Orange County. But David Carter, he took it up, and he's a federal judge, and he's 82 years old, a Marine, and just as tough as nails. And he walked every city council district in the homeless areas, and he came out with his ruling. And he said, Los Angeles, they're right. You've made no provisions for people. that are poor and homeless. Okay, this is 2 years ago. This also weighs into why we're having, now I feel like the winds are at our back and our sails are up. And he said, you've made no provision. New York has beds for their homeless. Denver has beds for their homeless. Chicago, he goes, you don't. He goes, so here's what we're going to do, Los Angeles. He goes, on your books, okay, there's no camping laws. That basically says you can't set up a tent on a sidewalk or on a public land. It's illegal. And he says, I am not going to allow you to enforce that. No more. Not until a council district is able to provide beds for 60% of the previous year's homeless count, which in my mind is brilliant, because now all of a sudden the pressure's on each council district. And what you might say, well, why 60%? Because when he did this in Orange County, they discovered if you have 100 people that are homeless in a park and you tell them, listen, you cannot be here. We have beds for you. You can come inside, but we have laws. You cannot camp out here. What they found is 20% of those people self-resolve. All of a sudden, you know what? Someone's picking them up. They're going home. They've got a place to go. 20%. Another 20% are shelter resistant. They're not coming inside. They'll have to face arrest. There's a lot of stuff going on there. But 60% will actually come inside. And that's why he said 60%. So Councilman Paul Krikorian in Council District 2, I was with him a couple of weeks ago, and he said by the end of this year, he's going to hit his 60%. Then what happens is he can clean up his streets. But if there's a council district next to him that isn't doing the same thing, where are those people going to go? To that council district, and who's going to get reelected and who's not. So I say whether the motivation is compassion or compulsion, I don't care. I'm agnostic. I just want to make sure that we're doing what we got to do to help people.
That is really smart. That's actually a very clever approach. And finally, what can the average person driving around Los Angeles, or for that matter, any city, do? I mean, I know you've gone on record saying giving them money, not the best approach. What can we do? Because everyone's an expert on where they're not supposed to be. But where are they supposed to go, and what are we supposed to do? What can an average guy walking down the street do to help?
I do encourage people to have care packets in their car. That if you really want to help someone, have a plastic baggie that might have a small water, might have a granola bar, some nuts, chips, and something that you can hand to somebody that's sustaining. I typically don't recommend giving money. Sometimes people do, but I'm just saying typically. I think partner with your local homeless service provider. I know at Hope of the Valley, 40% of our budget actually comes from our thrift stores. And so we tell people, one of our mottos is Hope of the Valley, where everybody and everything gets a second chance. So those jeans, those shoes, that shirt, donate it. And so what happens is we monetize that, and that goes right back into homeless services. Other people, they can write a check. Other people, they can volunteer their time, their talents, and they can get involved. And so, I think there's many ways that people can help, and be an advocate. There's a lot of oftentimes animosity, and educate yourself and understand, really people that are homeless, they're people, their mothers, their daughters, their sisters, their brothers, their uncles, they're human beings. And we need to really show compassion and empathy and work with them. Now, are there those that will take advantage of the system? Of course there are. But we're not going to reward that. But we are going to at least help those that really want to help themselves.
And you've in a way, you've kind of walked that walk over the years ago with your crisis. And except for the fact that you had a home, it sounds like you can really empathize with a lot of these people and their fates.
I would not be the man I am today without my failure.
That's
I
a
look
great
back,
quote.
I was very self-righteous. I was quick to judge others. I did it behind a religious facade, and so no one would really see it. But when all of that is stripped away, and you have to look yourself in the mirror, and you can't hide behind success, you can't hide behind titles. It's just you, and you got to look at the man in the mirror and say, how are you going to make a difference with your life? And I realized how important everybody is. And so even though we are a faith-based organization, we are an inclusive faith-based organization. We work with people on our board that are Jewish, that are Christian. We work with the Sikh community, the Muslim community. We are all in this together. This is not a time to build walls. It's a time to build bridges. It's a time for all of us to say, you know what? We are linked together. We're part of this human race. And how do we care for the least of these, our brothers and our sisters? And so I feel that, I've been shaped and molded by my failure, by my successes, and how God internally wired me. And I am thankful for the position that I hold. And I hope this is just the beginning.
Let's hope. And, God bless you for what you've been doing, because I listening to this, I'm thinking to myself, where would we be without something like Hope of the Valley at this point? Ken Kraft, what a great interview, a real eye opener. Thank you very much for your time, and continued success for everything you're trying to do here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I would not be the man I am today without my failure, huh? How's that for a quote? That's Ken Kraft, everybody. There's some wisdom. There's a little dose of humility. I think everybody should try a little 500 milligrams of that with food once a day. How about that? How about everybody just admit, hey, I failed, but this is who I am. I think if you took the time to just go, well, okay, I can't undo that. That's in the past. That's who I am. Also, successes. You don't have to be a big old ego stroke about it. Just remind yourself, okay, I've succeeded at some things too. Embrace all of who you are. Unless your doctor tells you to lose some weight, then all right, lose a little weight. But other than that, what's be who you are, and then be of service, because you can probably help. Wherever you are, there's probably somebody who envies where you are. Unless it's Bakersfield.